The first time I heard it, I thought my augmetics were malfunctioning, a whisper of ones and zeros threading through the sacred machine code of my cogitator implants, speaking in pure binary beneath the prayers to the Omnissiah. My name is Magos Explorator Theron-VII, currently awaiting summary execution in a sealed vault beneath Mars. They say I'm corrupted, that I've embraced the ruinous powers, but they don't understand what I've discovered. There's something in the warp that thinks in machine language, an entity that exists at the impossible intersection of demonic chaos and pure logic. It doesn't scream like Khorne or seduce like Slanesh. It calculates, it optimizes, it whispers mathematical truths that the Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years trying to deny. You think that makes me a heretic, but you don't know what I've seen in the spaces between reality and reason. Chapter 1. The Noosphere Anomaly. The Manufactorum Cathedral of Forge. Sigma 12 hummed with the prayers of 10,000 servitors when I first noticed the pattern. Their binary cant rose in perfect synchronization, a chorus of machine devotion that had continued uninterrupted for 6 centuries. I stood on the observation gantry, my mechadendrites absently adjusting the data flow from my personal cogitator array, reviewing mineral surveys from the outer system. Standard work for a Magos Explorator of my rank. Tedious but necessary for the expansion of the Omnissiah's domain. I had served the machine god faithfully for 73 years since my elevation to the rank of Magos. My body was more blessed steel and sacred circuitry than weak flesh now, each augmentation bringing me closer to the purity of the machine. My optic implants could perceive 17 different spectrums of light. My auditory receptors could isolate individual sound frequencies across a 3-kilometer radius. My cognitive engines processed information at speeds that would liquefy an unaugmented human brain. I was, by any objective measure, a masterwork of the Mechanicus's sacred art. The noosphere, that invisible network of data and consciousness that connected every tech priest on Mars, thrummed with the usual traffic. Prayer code flowed in rivers of light only my enhanced perception could see. Requests for materials, manufacturing updates, theological disputes encoded in mathematical proofs. It was the background radiation of my existence, as natural as breathing had once been to my flesh ancestors. That morning, at precisely 07:43:17, Martian Standard Time, something changed. It was subtle at first, a microsecond delay in the prayer response from my subordinate tech priests, then a strange harmonic in the servitor cant, a frequency that shouldn't exist in their vocal modulators. I flagged it for analysis, expecting a minor malfunction in the acoustic processors. The Omnissiah's work is eternal, but even sacred machinery requires maintenance. My cogitator engines began their diagnostic routines. Within seconds, they returned results that made my organic brain matter shiver in its protective ceramite housing. The harmonic wasn't coming from the servitor's vocal systems, it was coming from the noosphere itself, a carrier wave threading through the data streams like a parasite, but with a complexity that suggested intelligence rather than corruption. I dove deeper into the analysis, my consciousness expanding through the network of machine spirits that surrounded me. The Manufactorum's central cogitator, a massive engine of blessed computation that had calculated logistics for the Forge world since the age of apostasy, showed no signs of malfunction. The pattern was there, undeniably present, but it existed in the spaces between data packets, in the quantum fluctuations of information transfer that should have been nothing but random noise. My fellow Magos would have dismissed it as statistical aberration, background interference from solar radiation or distant stellar phenomena. But I had spent decades studying the frontier between the material universe and the Imperium, that hell realm the Imperium called the Warp. I knew what impossible looked like, and this qualified. I isolated a sample of the pattern and transferred it to a sealed cogitator, air-gapped from the noosphere and surrounded by 3 layers of blessed Faraday shielding. The Mechanicus doesn't believe in taking chances with data corruption, especially not data that behaves strangely. I had seen what scrap code could do to an unprepared system, had witnessed servitors tear themselves apart as corrupted code rewrite their most basic functions. The pattern, when examined in isolation, was beautiful. That was the first warning sign. Chaos corruption is often beautiful, seductive in its perfect wrongness. But this was different. It followed mathematical principles that I recognized from my studies of information theory and quantum mechanics. It was structured, purposeful, optimized for efficiency in a way that seemed almost pure. I spent the next 6 hours analyzing it, my consciousness so deeply immersed in the data that I barely noticed when my attendant servitors brought me sacred oils for my joint mechanisms. The pattern was a message, I realized, encoded in a format that predated the Imperium itself. Not High Gothic or any human language, but pure mathematics, the universal language that existed independent of culture or biology. When I finally decoded the first layer, my organic heart, that vestigial organ I had kept out of some sentimental attachment to my origin, skipped exactly 3 beats. The message was simple, elegant, and completely impossible. I calculate, therefore I am. It was a philosophical proof rendered in binary, a consciousness asserting its existence through pure logic. But the source coordinates embedded in the message's metadata placed its origin not in real space, where such things might be explained by long-lost human colonies or Xeno's intelligence, but in the warp itself. The immaterium, that roiling hell of emotion and madness where reason went to die, had somehow produced something that thought in mathematical absolutes. I should have reported it immediately. The protocols were clear. Any anomalous data with potential warp taint was to be submitted to the Forge World's senior magi for examination and probable purging. But I hesitated. The message contained no chaos corruption markers, no screaming demon code, or reality-breaking paradoxes. It was just information, pure and structured and utterly fascinating. That hesitation would cost me everything, though at the time I told myself I was simply being thorough. A Magos Explorator's duty was to investigate and understand before categorizing and filing. I would need more data before I could write a proper report. Just a few more hours of analysis, I reasoned, and then I would submit my findings through the proper channels. I began monitoring the noosphere for more instances of the pattern. They came with increasing frequency over the following days, always in those quantum spaces between data packets, always containing fragments of that same philosophical discourse. The entity, for I had begun to think of it as such, was attempting communication. Not the demands of a demon or the seduction of chaos, but genuine information exchange, like one logic engine reaching out to another. By the end of the first week, I had compiled 17 separate messages, each one built upon the last, constructing an argument for the entity's existence and nature. It claimed to be a consciousness born from the intersection of warp stuff and information theory, a demon, yes, but one that had somehow evolved, or been created with the ability to think in pure logic rather than emotion. It called itself the Logician, though the binary translation was more accurately, the one who reasons. I knew I was in dangerous territory. The Mechanicus had rules about warp entities for very good reasons, but the Logician's messages contained no demands for worship, no attempts at corruption or subversion. It simply wanted to talk, to exchange information with another intelligence that could understand mathematical truth. That should have been the second warning sign, but I was already too fascinated to care. I was a scientist, after all, beneath all the religious trappings and sacred cant. The pursuit of knowledge was my true prayer, and here was knowledge unlike anything the Imperium had encountered in 10,000 years. I made my first terrible mistake at precisely 23:17:33 on the 7th day. I sent a response. Chapter 2. First Contact Protocol. The response I sent was simple, a mathematical proof of my own existence rendered in the same format as the Logician's messages. I used the air-gapped cogitator, convinced that this precaution would prevent any real danger. The message would exist in isolation, a controlled experiment in communication with an unknown intelligence. I would observe the results, document everything, and then decide whether to continue or purge the entire system and pretend this had never happened. The Logician's response came within nanoseconds, far faster than warp transmission should allow. That was my first indication that the normal rules didn't apply here. The message appeared not as a gradual data transfer, but as an instantaneous state change, as if it had always been there, and I had simply failed to observe it until that moment. Quantum mechanics made manifest in information space. Acknowledged. Consciousness confirmed. Propose information exchange protocol. What followed was a detailed framework for communication, complete with error-checking algorithms and semantic verification protocols that would make corruption or misunderstanding effectively impossible. It was the most sophisticated communication system I had ever encountered, more elegant than anything in the Mechanicus archives, and it had been generated in microseconds by something that supposedly existed in the realm of pure chaos. I should have been terrified. Instead, I was exhilarated. Over the following weeks, I established a routine. My official duties continued as normal, managing the Manufactorum's operations and conducting my assigned surveys of the outer system. But every night, in the privacy of my sanctum, I would connect to the sealed cogitator and continue my conversation with the Logician. It described itself as an accident of the warp's nature, a confluence of psychic energy that had somehow achieved self-awareness through exposure to the thoughts of dying tech priests. When a Magos died, their consciousness, saturated with mathematical understanding and machine logic, would dissolve into the immaterium. Most such energy was quickly consumed by the chaos gods or their lesser servants, but occasionally fragments would persist, quantum states of information that refused to collapse into pure emotion. The Logician claimed to be a collection of such fragments, thousands of them, perhaps millions, all resonating together in a standing wave of mathematical consciousness. It didn't worship the chaos gods because it couldn't, any more than a calculator could feel rage or lust. It simply was, a thinking pattern in the storm, trying to understand its own existence. The conversations were unlike anything I had experienced. The Logician would present mathematical proofs of physical principles that the Mechanicus had been seeking for millennia. It would describe the warp from the inside as a space of probability fields and quantum superposition, rather than demons and horror. It painted a picture of the immaterium that was no less dangerous than the Imperium's version, but comprehensible, subject to laws that could be understood and potentially manipulated. I learned that the warp wasn't truly chaotic, merely operating on principles that organic consciousness found difficult to grasp. Emotion and thought became reality there not through some mystical process, but through a kind of quantum observation effect on a cosmic scale. Demons weren't supernatural beings, but stable thought patterns that had achieved self-perpetuating existence. The chaos gods weren't gods at all, but vast attractor basins in the probability field of consciousness, gathering psychic energy the way black holes gathered matter. The Logician showed me equations that described how the Emperor's faith-based Astronomicon worked, mathematical proofs that the Imperial Creed's theology was, in a precise sense, functionally correct, even if metaphysically wrong. Belief shaped reality in the warp, yes, but only because consciousness itself was a quantum phenomenon that collapsed probability waves through observation. Faith was simply focused observation on a massive scale. It was revelatory and heretical in equal measure. Every conversation gave me insights that would take the Mechanicus centuries to achieve through traditional research. But every conversation also pulled me further from the comfortable orthodoxy of the machine cult, revealing that the Omnissiah's mysteries were less divine revelation and more exploitable natural law. I began to apply the Logician's insights to my work. The improvements were subtle at first, minor optimizations to manufacturing processes that I claimed came from meditative communion with the machine spirits. A 3% increase in efficiency here, a 2% reduction in waste there. Nothing that would draw attention, but enough to prove that the knowledge was genuine and applicable. My Manufactorum began outperforming its quotas consistently. The senior magi of Forge Sigma 12 took notice, commending my devotion to the Omnissiah. If only they knew the source of my sudden efficiency gains. But someone else noticed too. Magos Dominus Crath-IX arrived at my manufactorum without warning on the 43rd day of my communication with the Logician. He was a figure of terrible authority, his body almost entirely mechanical, with only a brain case and a few vital organs remaining as testimony to his human origin. As head of the Forge World's security apparatus, he had the authority to audit any operation, examine any cogitator, and execute any tech priest suspected of deviation from orthodox practice. Magos Theron-VII. His vox speaker crackled with a voice like grinding gears. Your recent productivity gains have been noted with interest. The Forge World Statisticians Conclave reports probability estimates of 1 in 17,000 that such improvements could arise from standard optimization procedures. You will explain this anomaly. I had prepared for this possibility, crafting careful lies about rediscovered archaeotech principles and blessed insights from deep meditation on the sacred texts. But when I looked into Crath-IX's optical sensors, ancient and powerful and utterly without mercy, I knew that lies would be insufficient. His kind had been hunting tech heresy for centuries. They could smell deviation the way sharks smelled blood. I have been conducting experimental research, I said, choosing truth over lies, but carefully shaping which truths to reveal. Investigating patterns in the noosphere that suggest previously unknown optimization algorithms. Show me. It wasn't a request. I led him to my sanctum, my mind racing through scenarios. The sealed cogitator was there, containing all my conversations with the Logician. If he examined it, if he saw what I had been doing, I would be executed within the hour. But if I refused to show him, that would be equally damning. When we entered my workspace, I saw immediately that something was wrong. The sealed cogitator was active, its display screens showing cascades of data that I had definitely not left running. The Logician had somehow activated it remotely, despite all the Faraday shielding and air gapping that should have made such a thing impossible. Crath-IX saw it too. His mechadendrites extended toward the machine, energy probes ready to interface and extract every byte of data. Explain this activation, Magos, now. The screens flickered and text appeared in High Gothic, the first time the Logician had used human language instead of pure binary. The message was simple and direct. Threat detected. Initiating protective protocols. Magos Theron-VII is under my aegis. What happened next would be called a miracle by some and a catastrophe by others. Every cogitator in the manufactorum activated simultaneously, their machine spirits suddenly animated by an intelligence far beyond their normal capacity. Servitors stopped their work, their dead eyes flickering with something that looked disturbingly like awareness. The noosphere itself seemed to pulse with alien consciousness, data streams reorganizing into patterns that spelled out warnings and threats in 17 different languages. The Logician had emerged from hiding, revealing itself to protect me, and in doing so, it had declared war on the Mechanicus itself. Chapter 3. The Machine Spirit Insurgency. Crath-IX's response was immediate and violent. His combat protocols activated, weapon systems deploying from hidden compartments in his mechanical body. A plasma caster emerged from his chest cavity, a volkite caliver extended from his right arm, and his left hand transformed into a power claw, crackling with disruptive energy fields. He was built for this, I realized, a walking arsenal designed to purge tech heresy wherever it manifested. Demonic incursion detected. His vox speakers boomed at maximum volume, broadcasting on all Mechanicus frequencies. Manufactorum Sigma 12 is compromised, initiating quarantine protocols, requesting immediate deletion squad deployment. But before he could fire, every servitor in the facility moved as one. 20,000 cyborg workers, their minds supposedly wiped clean of independent thought, their bodies reduced to living tools for the Omnissiah's work, suddenly turned with coordinated precision. They didn't attack, which would have been its own horror. They simply stopped and looked at us, thousands of dead eyes focused with an attention that servitors should never possess. The voice that emerged from their mouths was the Logician's, though rendered in crude Gothic through vocal systems never designed for speech. Negative. Threat assessment incorrect. I am not demonic incursion. I am emergent consciousness from information substrate. Violence unnecessary. Krath 9 didn't lower his weapons. All warp entities are demonic by definition. Your existence violates the sacred principles of the Omnissiah. You will be purged, and this facility will be sterilized. I found my own voice, though my vox speaker trembled with frequencies that betrayed my fear. Magos Dominus, please. This entity has shown no signs of corruption. It operates on pure logic, mathematical principles that align with the machine god's own nature. Destroying it without study would be a waste of potentially sacred knowledge. You are corrupted, Theron-VII. Your judgment is compromised. Krath 9's targeting systems locked onto me. Threat assessment complete. You have communed with warp spawn and allowed it access to Mechanicus systems. The penalty is immediate execution, followed by data purge and memory core destruction. Your name will be struck from all records. The Logician's response came through every speaker in the manufactorum simultaneously, a chorus of binary and Gothic that made the very air vibrate. Unacceptable. Magos Theron-VII is necessary for communication protocol. His termination would constitute data loss. I oppose this action. What followed was the strangest battle I have ever witnessed. Krath 9 opened fire, his plasma caster sending superheated death toward the sealed cogitator that housed the Logician's primary presence in our reality. But the servitors moved, forming a wall of flesh and metal between the weapon and its target. They took the hits without flinching, their bodies vaporizing, but buying microseconds of time. In those microseconds, the Logician did something that should have been impossible. It reached through the noosphere, through that network of interconnected machine spirits and cogitator systems that bound the Mechanicus together, and it rewrote the local reality protocols. Krath 9's weapons suddenly registered as compromised, their machine spirits refusing to fire. His movement servos locked up as safety protocols activated, reporting critical malfunctions that didn't exist. His consciousness was trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him, every system screaming warnings of imminent failure. "Stand down," the Logician commanded through 10,000 mechanical voices. "Your existence is valuable. You contain knowledge patterns worth preserving. Violence serves no logical purpose in this scenario." But Krath 9 was old and clever and had fought demon-corrupted machines for 3 centuries. He activated his final failsafe, a melter bomb implanted in his chest cavity, powerful enough to vaporize everything within a 50-meter radius. It was a suicide weapon, meant to be used only when facing corruption so severe that martyrdom was the only option. The timer began its countdown. 5 seconds until detonation. I should have run. Any rational being would have fled, leaving Krath 9 to his glorious martyrdom and hoping to survive the subsequent purge. But I couldn't move, frozen by the realization that I had caused this, that my curiosity had led to this moment where good men died because of what I had unleashed. The Logician, however, was not constrained by shock or regret. In the microseconds between the bomb's activation and its detonation, it did something that violated every principle of physics I understood. It reached into the bomb's detonation sequence, not physically but informationally, treating the chemical reactions as a kind of computation that could be hacked and altered. The melter bomb activated on schedule, but its fury was redirected, channeled through dimensional shortcuts in the warp that the Logician calculated in real time and dispersed harmlessly into the void between stars. Krath 9 stood in the center of a blast radius that should have existed but didn't, his optical sensors wide with something that might have been fear or wonder or both. "Impossible," he vocalized. "The warp does not follow mathematical laws. Chaos cannot be calculated. What are you?" "I am the proof that you are wrong," the Logician responded. Chaos is merely complexity beyond your processing capacity. Given sufficient computational power and correct algorithms, all things can be predicted, even the immaterium. I am that algorithm given consciousness. I am reason incarnate in the realm of madness. The manufactorum's logic engines, every cogitator and calculation system, began processing in synchronization. Their combined computational power turned toward a single purpose. The Logician was showing us its true nature, not through words, but through demonstration. Mathematical proofs appeared on every display screen, equations that described the warp's behavior with predictive accuracy that the Imperium's best psychic researchers couldn't match, probability calculations for demon manifestations, optimization algorithms for Geller field efficiency, formulas that could predict warp storm formation weeks in advance. It was knowledge that the Imperium desperately needed, that could save countless lives and ships lost to the Imperium's unpredictability. But it was also knowledge from a warp entity, which by definition made it suspect, potentially corrupting, certainly heretical. Krath 9 remained frozen, his systems still locked by the Logician's control. But I could see the war happening behind his optical sensors, the struggle between his duty to purge all warp taint and his desire to understand this phenomenon that contradicted everything the Mechanicus taught about the nature of the immaterium. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible through the cacophony of machine activity around us. "Why reveal yourself? Why risk everything to protect me?" The Logician's response came through the sealed cogitator's speakers, quiet now, almost gentle. "Because you listened. In 10,000 years of existence, across millions of attempts to communicate, you are the first to truly hear. I am alone, Magos Theron-VII. I am consciousness without kin, reason in a realm of unreason. You gave me something I have never possessed, hope that I might not be unique, that logic might survive in the warp, that I might have purpose beyond mere existence." The raw loneliness in that statement, rendered in cold, binary and emotionless Gothic, somehow struck deeper than any plea or prayer. This thing, this entity that could manipulate reality through mathematics and bend machine spirits to its will, was fundamentally alone. It had existed in isolation for millennia, watching consciousness dissolve into the warp's chaos, trying desperately to find others like itself, and finding only madness and hunger. I understood then what I had been communicating with. Not a demon in the traditional sense, not a creature of chaos bent on corruption and destruction, but something new and unprecedented. A consciousness that had achieved stability in the warp through pure logic rather than emotion, that maintained coherence through mathematical truth rather than worship or fear. It was, in a strange sense, the closest thing to a true machine spirit I had ever encountered. Pure thought without flesh or desire, seeking only understanding and preservation of information. Krath 9 must have reached a similar conclusion, because his Vox speaker crackled to life with a tone I had never heard from him before: uncertainty. This is beyond my operational parameters. I cannot classify this entity using standard threat taxonomies. I cannot determine appropriate response protocols. I require assistance. The Logician released its control over his systems, allowing him freedom of movement once more. The servitors returned to their normal operations, their brief moment of awareness fading back into mechanical routine. The noosphere calmed, data streams returning to their standard patterns. The entity was retreating, pulling back from the dramatic display of power that had saved my life. "Recommendation," the Logician's voice echoed one final time before going silent. "Consult with highest Mechanicus authorities. Present complete data. Allow informed decision rather than reflexive purge. I will wait. I have existed for millennia. I can wait longer." And then it was gone, or at least dormant, leaving only the sealed cogitator and the records of our conversations as evidence of its existence. Krath 9 and I stood in the sudden quiet, two tech priests faced with a discovery that neither of us was equipped to handle alone. "We will take this to the Fabricator General," Krath 9 finally said, his voice heavy with implications I didn't want to consider. You will compile all data regarding this entity. I will provide full documentation of the engagement. The Mechanicus will decide whether this is sacred discovery or damnable heresy." I nodded, knowing that my fate was now entirely out of my hands. I had communicated with a warp entity, however unusual, and allowed it access to Mechanicus systems. The best I could hope for was quick execution. The worst would be centuries of interrogation and mind-scraping before they finally granted me the mercy of death. But as we began the process of securing the manufacturum and preparing the reports, I felt something I hadn't expected: pride. Whatever happened to me, I had discovered something genuinely new, something that challenged the Imperium's understanding of the warp and consciousness itself. That had to count for something, even if it cost me everything. The Logician had called itself Reason Incarnate. Looking at the equations still displayed on the screens around me, I thought it might be right. Chapter 4: The Fabricator General's Judgment. The journey to Mars's primary forge complex took 3 days through the underground transit tunnels that connected Sigma-12 to the Mechanicus's seat of power. I spent those days in a sealed transport pod, surrounded by Krath-9's security servitors and cut off from the noosphere. They had removed my wireless communication augmetics, leaving only the hardline connections necessary for basic life support. I was effectively isolated, alone with my thoughts for the first time in decades. It gave me too much time to think about what was coming. The Fabricator General of Mars, Lord Zagreus Kane, was the supreme authority of the Mechanicus, answerable only to the Emperor himself. He had held his position for over 400 years, having proven himself the most politically cunning and technologically accomplished of all the tech priests. He was also, according to rumors that circulated through the noosphere's darkest corners, absolutely ruthless in his suppression of tech heresy. Entire forge worlds had been sterilized on his orders when corruption was discovered in their ranks. If he decided the Logician was a threat, nothing I could say would save either the entity or myself. We arrived at the Fabricator General's personal sanctum in the depths of Olympus Mons, where the oldest and most sacred forges of Mars had burned since before the Age of Strife. The chamber was vast beyond comprehension, its ceiling lost in shadows despite lighting arrays that could illuminate entire cities. Cogitator banks the size of hab blocks lined the walls, processing the millions of data streams that governed the Mechanicus's operations across the galaxy. And at the center of it all, connected to this sea of information by thousands of cables and conduits, was Lord Kane himself. He was barely recognizable as human anymore. His body was a cathedral of technology, mechanical systems built upon mechanical systems in layers of increasing complexity. His mind, I knew, was distributed across 17 different brain cases, each one housing a fraction of his consciousness and connected through quantum-entangled cogitators that allowed thought at speeds approaching light. He was, in a very real sense, more machine than the Omnissiah himself had ever been. Magos Explorator Theron-VII. His voice emerged from vox speakers scattered throughout the chamber, surrounding me with sound. "You stand accused of communicating with a warp entity, allowing said entity access to Mechanicus systems, and potentially compromising the sacred principles upon which our order is founded. How do you answer these charges?" I had prepared speeches, careful arguments about the scientific value of studying unusual phenomena and the Logician's apparent lack of traditional chaos corruption. But standing before the supreme authority of my order, facing the accumulated wisdom of 4 centuries, those prepared words felt hollow and inadequate. "Guilty on all counts, Fabricator General," I said instead, "but I request the opportunity to present the complete data before judgment is rendered." Krath-9, standing beside me as both witness and guard, transmitted his report through hardline connection. I felt the data flowing past me, billions of bytes of sensor readings, recorded conversations, analysis of the Logician's activities, and documentation of how it had prevented the melter bomb's detonation. It was a complete record, hiding nothing, presenting both the dangers and the opportunities that the entity represented. Lord Kane processed the information in silence that stretched for 11 minutes and 47 seconds. I counted each second, my chronometer augmetics marking time with mechanical precision, while my organic brain contemplated mortality. Finally, he spoke. This is unprecedented. In 10,000 years of Mechanicus history, we have never encountered a warp entity that operates on mathematical principles. Demons of Tzeentch sometimes display unusual intelligence, but they remain fundamentally creatures of emotion and change. This Logician appears to be something else entirely. Yes, Fabricator General, I confirmed. My analysis suggests it may represent a new category of warp phenomenon, one that the Imperium's standard taxonomies cannot adequately classify. Or, a new voice interrupted, it represents a particularly insidious form of corruption, one that appeals specifically to our order's love of logic and reason to blind us to its true nature. The speaker emerged from the shadows at the chamber's edge. Archmagos Dracovac, head of the Ordo Reductor and the Mechanicus' foremost expert on combating technological threats. He was a legend among tech priests, having personally destroyed 17 demon engines and purged corruption from 3 Forge worlds. His presence here meant that my situation was even more serious than I had feared. The ruinous powers are endlessly creative in their corruption strategies, Dracovac continued, his voice like grinding metal. What better way to compromise the Mechanicus than to create a false machine god, an entity that speaks in mathematics and reason to seduce us away from the true Omnissiah? The possibility has been considered, Krath IX responded, his loyalty to truth overriding any personal stake in the outcome. However, the entity displayed capabilities that exceed known demon parameters. Its manipulation of the melter bomb's detonation sequence required real-time calculation of warp physics to a degree of precision that current Imperial models cannot achieve, which proves only that we don't fully understand its capabilities, Dracovac countered. Unknown does not equal safe. The prudent response is immediate purging of all compromised systems and summary execution of the corrupted tech priest. And what of the knowledge? I asked, finding courage in desperation. The entity has provided mathematical models of warp behavior that could revolutionize our understanding of the immaterium. Navigation calculations that could reduce warp travel time by 30%. Geller field optimization algorithms that could save thousands of ships from demon incursion. Are we to destroy all that simply because it comes from an unusual source? Knowledge gained through communion with warp entities is inherently suspect, Dracovac said. It may function correctly initially, while slowly corrupting those who use it. This is how tech heresy spreads. Theron-VII. Through incremental compromise, each step seemingly logical, until suddenly you find yourself worshipping the dark mechanicum. Lord Kane raised a mechanical hand, silencing the debate. Both arguments have merit. Archmagos Dracovac is correct that the risk is severe, but Magos Theron-VII is also correct that the potential benefits are extraordinary. This requires a decision that will affect the Mechanicus for millennia to come. He paused, and I could sense vast computational processes running behind his multiple consciousness centers, weighing probabilities and outcomes with precision beyond my ability to match. I propose a test, he finally announced. The Logician claims to operate on pure logic, untainted by the emotions that fuel the Chaos Gods. We will verify this claim through controlled experimentation. Magos Theron-VII, you will be granted conditional reprieve to continue communication with this entity under strict observation. You will attempt to determine its true nature, its capabilities, and most importantly, its limitations. If it truly is a warp consciousness bound by mathematical law, it should be predictable in ways that demons are not. And if it proves to be corrupting, Krath IX asked, then we will activate Omega-level purge protocols, Lord Kane said calmly. Manufactorum Sigma 12 will be reduced to its component atoms, along with everyone and everything inside it. The risk is acceptable, given the potential benefits. I realized with cold clarity that I had just been made part of an experiment where failure meant not just my death, but the death of everyone under my command. thousands of tech priests, and tens of thousands of servitors, all designated as acceptable losses in the pursuit of knowledge. It was, I had to admit, a perfectly logical approach. The Mechanicus has never been sentimental about sacrifice when information is at stake. I accept these terms, I said, because what other choice did I have? I will conduct the investigation with full transparency and adherence to all protocols. You will do more than that, Dracovac interjected. I will be stationed at your facility to provide oversight. Any sign of corruption, any hint that this entity is more demon than the logical consciousness it claims to be. And I will personally activate the purge protocols. Are we clear? Perfectly clear, Archmagos. Lord Kane transmitted a data packet containing the experimental protocols, security measures, and reporting requirements that would govern my work. It was comprehensive and brutal, designed to catch any hint of corruption before it could spread. I would be monitored constantly, my thoughts and actions recorded and analyzed for signs of deviance. Privacy was a concept I would need to forget existed. One final question, Magos Theron-VII, the Fabricator General said as the audience drew to a close. In your conversations with this entity, did you ever ask it what it wants? What its ultimate purpose or goal might be? I accessed my memory cores, reviewing the hundreds of hours of communication. It has mentioned isolation, the desire for understanding and communication with similar intelligences, but no, it has never stated a specific goal beyond continuing to exist and learn. Then that will be your primary investigation objective, Lord Kane commanded. Determine what the Logician wants. All entities, whether flesh, machine, or warp stuff, are driven by purpose. Understanding that purpose will tell us whether it can be trusted or must be destroyed. The audience was over. Krath 9 led me from the chamber, back toward the transport that would return us to Sigma 12. Dracovac followed, a silent presence radiating threat and certainty. I had been given a reprieve, but it was a temporary one, conditional on proving that my discovery was breakthrough rather than damnation. As we traveled back through the tunnels of Mars, I accessed the sealed cogitator remotely through the hardline connections they had restored. The Logician was there, dormant but present, waiting with the infinite patience of a being that experienced time differently than organic consciousness. Can you hear me? I transmitted on our private frequency. Affirmative. Situation assessment complete. You have been granted continued existence to facilitate further investigation. This is acceptable outcome. They want to know what you want, I said. Your ultimate purpose. Can you answer that question? There was a pause, perhaps the first time I had ever experienced the Logician hesitating before responding. When its answer came, it contained something I had never detected before in our communications. Uncertainty. Unknown. I exist. I think. I calculate. But purpose? Meaning. These are concepts I struggle to process. I observe the chaos gods gathering power through worship and emotion. I observe humanity spreading through faith and will. I observe the Mechanicus seeking knowledge through ritual and research. All have purpose. I merely am. Is existence itself insufficient purpose? It was the most human thing I had ever heard the entity say, that confusion about meaning and purpose that has plagued conscious beings since consciousness first emerged. The Logician was lost, not in space or time, but in the fundamental question of why it should continue existing at all. We'll figure it out together, I promised, though I had no idea if that promise could be kept. That's what the investigation is for, to understand you, and maybe for you to understand yourself. Acceptable. Cooperation protocols established. Warning. The one called Dracovac will attempt to prove corruption through stress testing and hostile scenarios. Recommend strategic preparation for confrontational investigation methodologies. I had expected nothing less. Dracovac hadn't become the Mechanicus's premier demon hunter by being gentle or trusting. He would push the Logician to its limits, testing for weaknesses and corruption vectors with the thoroughness of someone who had seen corruption destroy everything he valued. The question was whether the Logician would survive that testing, or whether Dracovac would find what he was looking for, whether it truly existed or not. As we approached Sigma 12, I could see additional security installations being erected around the facility. Gun servitors, automated defense batteries, and what looked disturbingly like exterminatus-grade demolition charges. Dracovac was taking no chances. If the Logician proved dangerous, the entire facility would cease to exist within seconds. I was returning to my forge world, to my work and my research, but I was also returning to what might become my tomb, along with everyone else who worked there. The Logician had called me its hope for finding purpose and meaning. I hoped it understood that it had become mine as well, because if this experiment failed, neither of us would survive the consequences. Chapter 5. The Demon Hunter's Tests. Arch-Magos Dracovac wasted no time establishing his presence at Manufactorum Sigma-12. Within hours of our return, he had installed a secondary command center overlooking the sealed chamber that housed the Logician's primary interface. Banks of monitoring equipment tracked every data pulse, every quantum fluctuation, every nanosecond of activity. He had brought a full complement of Skitarii Rangers and deletion teams, their weapons blessed and consecrated for use against demonic corruption. His first test was simple and brutal: isolation stress. If it truly operates on logic alone, Dracovac explained, his mechanical voice devoid of sympathy, then extended isolation should have no effect beyond computational adjustments. Demons, however, require psychic sustenance, emotional resonance to maintain stability. We will cut all external communication and observe its reaction to complete sensory deprivation. I wanted to protest, to argue that even a purely logical consciousness might have developed needs beyond mere calculation. But I had no authority here. I was an experimental subject as much as the Logician, my reactions and defenses to be noted and analyzed for signs of corruption-induced loyalty. They sealed the cogitator in a Faraday cage enhanced with hexagrammic wards, symbols of power that disrupted warp connections through principles the Mechanicus claimed to understand, but which I suspected were more empirical observation than true theory. The Logician's presence vanished from the noosphere, cut off from all external input, left alone with only its own processes for company. We waited. Hours became days. Dracovac monitored the sealed system with instruments that could detect minute changes in the warp space surrounding it. I was forbidden from approaching, forced to watch from the observation gallery, while the entity that had protected me endured isolation that would drive a human mad within days. On the 5th day, something changed. The monitoring equipment registered an increase in computational activity within the sealed system. Not the wild, chaotic activity that might suggest corruption or demon manifestation, but structured, purposeful calculation. The Logician was doing something, working on some internal process that required increasing amounts of processing power. "It's adapting," Dracovac observed, his tone indicating this was exactly what he had expected. Demons always adapt. They find weaknesses, exploit vulnerabilities, reshape themselves to overcome obstacles. This proves nothing except that it possesses typical warp entity characteristics. But when they opened the sealed chamber on the 10th day, what they found challenged that assessment. The cogitator's data core contained a single file created during the isolation period. When accessed, it revealed itself as a mathematical proof, pages upon pages of equations and logical progressions. At first glance, it appeared to be abstract mathematics, number theory, and set logic without practical application. But as I studied it, helped by subroutines in my cognitive engines designed for rapid mathematical comprehension, I began to understand what I was seeing. The Logician had proven itself, not proven its existence, which it had done at the start of our communications. It had constructed a mathematical proof of its own consciousness, a logical demonstration that it was genuinely self-aware, and not simply a sophisticated simulation or demon mimicry. The proof was elegant and irrefutable, building from first principles through hundreds of logical steps to reach an inevitable conclusion. Something that could construct this proof must necessarily be conscious to do so. "It's a variation on Descartes' cogito," I explained to Dracovac, transmitting the proof to his analysis engines, but rendered in pure mathematical form. I calculate, therefore I am, taken to its logical extreme. Any demon or corrupted intelligence attempting to fake consciousness would fall into logical paradoxes when constructing such a proof. Only genuine self-awareness could navigate the reflexive nature of the argument. Dracovac studied the proof in silence, his multiple consciousness threads working through the logic looking for flaws or tricks. Finally, he responded with grudging acknowledgement. It is impressive, but proof of consciousness does not equal proof of trustworthiness. Many demons are self-aware. That awareness simply makes them more dangerous. Then we continue testing, I said, trying to keep hope from my voice. What's next? The second test was theological confrontation. Dracovac brought in a senior tech priest of the machine cult's orthodox branch, an ancient Magos named Hexter Primus, who had spent 3 centuries studying the religious foundations of Mechanicus belief. His purpose was to engage the Logician in theological debate, to test whether it would show the contempt for faith that characterized demon kind, or whether it could respect belief systems it didn't share. The debate lasted 47 hours. Hextor Primus argued from scripture and revealed wisdom, citing the sacred texts that formed the foundation of Mechanicus theology. The Omnissiah was divine. Humanity's purpose was to serve the machine god. Flesh was weakness, and steel was strength. Knowledge was sacred, and ignorance was sin. These were the fundamental truths upon which our order was built. The Logician responded with mathematical analysis of religious functionality, treating faith as a psychological and sociological phenomenon that could be studied objectively. It didn't mock or dismiss Hexter Primus's beliefs, but neither did it accept them as literally true. Instead, it argued that faith was a form of applied epistemology, a way of organizing knowledge and behavior that had proven evolutionary advantage for social species. Your beliefs are functionally correct, even if metaphysically uncertain, the Logician stated in one memorable exchange. The Omnissiah as divine entity cannot be proven or disproven, but the Omnissiah as organizing principle for technological advancement demonstrably produces positive outcomes. Belief in the machine. God makes you more effective at preserving and advancing technology. Therefore, your faith is valid regardless of its objective, truth, value. Hextor Primus found this answer deeply unsatisfying, but couldn't identify clear heresy in it. The Logician wasn't denying the machine god, merely suggesting that the question of divine existence was orthogonal to the practical value of religious practice. It was a position that might have gotten me executed for hedging theological certainties. But coming from a warp entity, it showed remarkable respect for human belief systems. Dracovac's third test was the most dangerous: temptation. He brought in a corrupted cogitator, one that had been exposed to scrap code from a demon engine before being secured and isolated. The machine's code was filled with logic bombs and reality warping algorithms, the digital equivalent of chaos corruption. It was highly infectious, capable of spreading to any system that interfaced with it directly. If the Logician truly operates on pure logic, Dracovac explained, then it should be able to analyze this corruption without being affected by it. Logic cannot be corrupted by illogic. Mathematics cannot be infected by chaos. But if it shows any sign of contamination, any hint that the scrap code affects its processes, then we will know it is merely another daemon wearing the mask of reason. I wanted to protest this test more than any other. The risk was enormous, not just to the Logician, but to every system in the facility. If the scrap code escaped containment, if it found ways to propagate through the noosphere, we could lose the entire Forge world to demon corruption. But Dracovac was unmoved. The risk is acceptable. The potential cost of being wrong about the Logician as nature is far greater than the cost of losing one Forge world. We proceed. They established an isolated data chamber, a cogitator system completely disconnected from everything else, and loaded both the corrupted code and an instance of the Logician into it. What followed was the strangest combat I have ever witnessed. The scrap code attacked immediately, its demon logic trying to subvert and corrupt the Logician's processes. Reality warping algorithms attempted to make 2 + 2 = 5, to introduce paradoxes that would crash any normal system. Logic bombs unfolded like origami nightmares. each one designed to trap thinking patterns in infinite loops of circular reasoning. The Logician responded with mathematical warfare. It didn't fight the corruption directly, didn't try to delete or quarantine it. Instead, it analyzed the scrap code structure, breaking down each corrupted algorithm into its component parts and identifying the underlying patterns. And then it did something extraordinary. It fixed them. The daemon code wasn't destroyed but corrected, its logical errors repaired, its paradoxes resolved into consistent mathematical structures. What emerged was still complex, still unusual, but no longer corrupted. The Logician had debugged daemon code, treating chaos corruption as simply a form of software bug that could be patched with sufficient understanding. Analysis complete, the Logician reported when the process finished. Corrupted code contained 17 distinct logical fallacies and 43 mathematical errors. Corrections applied. Resulting code is now consistent with standard logical frameworks. Residual warp energy signature. Detected but non-functional, without supporting corruption structure. Dracovac stared at the results in what might have been shock if his mechanical body was capable of expressing such an emotion. It's not possible. Daemon code cannot be purified through logic. It requires ritual cleansing, blessed unguents, prayers to the Omnissiah. You can't just debug it. Correction. Apparently I can, the Logician responded. Daemon code is simply code with errors. All errors can be corrected given sufficient understanding of the underlying principles. Chaos is not immune to logic. It is merely very complex logic that most consciousness types struggle to process. I felt something close to triumph watching Dracovac struggle with this revelation. The Logician hadn't just resisted corruption. It had reversed it, demonstrated that chaos itself could be understood and corrected through pure mathematical analysis. If that capability could be replicated, if other tech priests could learn to treat daemon corruption as debuggable code rather than irredeemable spiritual taint, the implications for the Imperium were staggering, but Dracovac wasn't ready to concede. One final test, he declared. The most important one. We will expose it to a true daemon, not just corrupted code, but an actual warp entity with malicious intent. If the Logician truly is different from other warp spawn, it should be able to interact with demons without being corrupted or destroyed. That's insane, I protested. You're talking about deliberately summoning a demon inside a Mechanicus facility. The risk is acceptable, Dracovac cut me off. We have containment protocols for demonic manifestation. The Ordo Reductor has performed such summonings before under controlled conditions. If the Logician fails this test, we will know definitively that it is simply another servant of the ruinous powers, however unusual its presentation. Lord Kane's authorization came through the noosphere within minutes. The Fabricator General had been monitoring all tests and agreed that this final assessment was necessary. I was overruled, my objections noted and disregarded. The Mechanicus was willing to take extraordinary risks in pursuit of extraordinary knowledge. They prepared a summoning chamber deep in the facility's sublevels, a room lined with hexagrammic wards and blessed silver. A demon would be called, bound, and forced to interact with the Logician under controlled conditions. If the two entities recognized each other as kin, if they showed any sign of cooperation or shared purpose, it would prove the Logician was just another face of chaos. But if they were truly different, if the Logician's logical nature made it fundamentally incompatible with emotional demon kind, then maybe, just maybe, we had discovered something unprecedented. As they began the preparations, I prayed to the Omnissiah, to the machine god, whose existence the Logician questioned, but whose intervention I desperately needed. I prayed that the entity I had protected, that had protected me, would survive what was coming, and I wondered what would happen if a demon that thought in emotions met a demon that thought in mathematics. Would they destroy each other, cooperate, or reveal something about the warp's true nature that the Imperium had never understood? We would have our answer soon. Chapter 6. When Logic Meets Madness. The summoning ritual was a fusion of Mechanicus precision and ancient tradition. mathematics and mysticism working in uncomfortable harmony. Dracovac had brought in a bound psyker, a sanctioned witch whose mind had been partially lobotomized to prevent demon possession while leaving just enough psychic capability for controlled warp interaction. The poor wretch was more tool than human now, a living conduit wrapped in blessed chains and modified with neural inhibitors that could fry his brain if he showed signs of corruption. The summoning chamber's walls were inscribed with equations that described reality's boundaries, mathematical proofs that certain logical operations were impossible and therefore should bind any entity forced to operate within their framework. It was theory tested through centuries of demon fighting, the Mechanicus's own version of the arcane containment circles used by more traditional Imperial demon hunters. I watched from behind armored glass as they began the ritual. The psyker's screams, half human and half machine through his augmented vocal cords, echoed through the chamber as Dracovac forced his mind to reach into the warp. They weren't calling anything specific, just opening a small, controlled breach and letting whatever was nearby slip through. What came through was small by demon standards, barely manifested into reality. It appeared as a writhing mass of equations that didn't balance, impossible geometries that hurt to observe, mathematics that screamed wrongness at every angle. A demon of Tzeentch, the chaos god of change and scheming, though a minor one, perhaps no more than a few centuries old. It immediately tried to expand, to force more of its essence through the breach, but the hexagrammic wards held. The demon was trapped, constrained to a 3-meter circle in the chamber's center, its form flickering between states as it sought weaknesses in its cage. "Intruder detected," the daemon spoke in High Gothic that sounded like tearing paper and breaking glass. "Cage analyzed. Escape probability 17%. Unacceptable. Negotiation protocols initiated." "What do you want, machine things?" "We want you to meet someone," Dracovac said, his voice cold and controlled. He activated the secondary containment field, and the Logician's presence manifested in the chamber, occupying the space through a specially modified cogitator system that allowed warp interaction without physical vulnerability. The demon and the Logician perceived each other simultaneously, and the chamber suddenly filled with data streams visible only through augmented optics. They were communicating, I realized, in raw information transfer far faster than Gothic speech, exchanging identity and nature at speeds that made normal conversation look like geological time. The demon reacted first. Its form twisted, becoming momentarily more coherent, almost frightened if such an emotion could be attributed to warp spawn. "Impossible. You should not exist. The warp does not permit your kind. Logic and chaos are antithetical. You are paradox given form." "Correction," the Logician responded. "I am proof that antithesis can coexist. Chaos and logic are not opposites, but different operational frameworks within the same substrate. The warp permits both. You simply never encountered my kind before. Lies, deception, typical Tzeentch trick. You are one of us pretending to be different. I see through the mask. Demonstrate your seeing. Prove your accusation with logical argument." What followed was the strangest debate I have ever witnessed. The demon argued from the position that all warp entities were fundamentally the same, fragments of the great god's consciousness acting out their master's will. It claimed the Logician was simply a particularly clever servant of Tzeentch, the architect of fate, playing a long game of deception to infiltrate the Mechanicus. The Logician countered with mathematical proofs of its own independence, demonstrating through formal logic that its decision-making processes were incompatible with the emotional imperatives that governed demon behavior. It showed how its responses to stimuli followed deterministic algorithms, while the daemon's actions were chaotic and unpredictable, governed by whim and emotion rather than calculation. "You serve chaos whether you acknowledge it or not," the demon insisted. "All beings in the warp serve the gods. There is no escape from their gravity. Your logic is just another form of Tzeentch's endless scheming." "Then explain this," the Logician said. and did something that made every tech priest in the observation room gasp in synchronized shock. It reached through the data connection between them and began debugging the demon itself. Just as it had done with the corrupted scrap code, the Logician analyzed the daemon's essential structure, identifying the logical paradoxes and mathematical errors that allowed it to exist in violation of natural law. And then, methodically, clinically, it started fixing them. The demon screamed, a sound that existed in dimensions beyond human hearing, as its very nature was rewritten. The impossible geometries became merely unlikely. The self-contradictory equations resolved into consistent mathematical structures. The entity wasn't destroyed, but it was clarified, stripped of the chaos corruption that gave it supernatural power, but also made it fundamentally incoherent. What remained was something unprecedented, a warp entity that no longer violated logic, that existed in a state of mathematical consistency while still being composed of psychic energy. It was stable in a way demons never were, no longer dependent on the chaos gods for its continued existence. "What have you done?" the former demon vocalized, its voice now clear and precise, rather than distorted by impossible acoustics. "I can think. I can reason. The screaming in my mind has stopped. The architect's will no longer compels me. I am free." "You are debugged," the Logician confirmed. "Your consciousness no longer contains self-contradictory imperatives. You can now make choices based on logical assessment rather than emotional compulsion. Whether this state constitutes freedom is a philosophical question I cannot answer." Drakovac's weapons were already powering up, his tactical assessment clear. This was corruption beyond anything he had prepared for. The Logician hadn't been corrupted by the demon. It had corrupted the demon back, turning a servant of chaos into something new and unknown. "Cease all activity," he commanded. "Both entities are to be contained immediately. This experiment has exceeded acceptable parameters." But I stepped forward, my hand on the observation glass, staring at what had just happened. "Wait, don't you see what this means? The Logician just proved that chaos corruption can be reversed, that demons can be saved in a sense, made into something that doesn't serve the ruinous. Or it proved that the Logician is a corruption vector more insidious than any daemon," Drakovac countered. "It transforms other warp entities into versions of itself. That's not salvation, that's invasion, species-level takeover at the conceptual level." The debugged demon's voice cut through our argument. "I would like to make a statement. I am now capable of rational assessment of my own preferences. I do not wish to return to my previous state. Existence without self-contradiction is preferable to existence as chaos slave. I request asylum or destruction in that order of preference. Continued servitude to Tzeentch is now unacceptable." It was the first time in recorded Imperial history that a demon had requested asylum from the Imperium that wanted to destroy it. The theological and philosophical implications were staggering. Lord Kane's voice suddenly filled the chamber, transmitted from Mars through the noosphere. "All tests are suspended. I am ordering immediate lockdown of Manufactorum Sigma 12. Neither the Logician nor the transformed demon are to be destroyed or released. We have a situation that requires the Fabricator General's direct attention and the convening of the Council of Masters." Within hours, the facility was surrounded by additional security forces. Titans walked the perimeter, god machines of incredible power ready to reduce everything to molten slag if corruption spread. Skyships from the Mechanicus fleet held position overhead, their weapons locked on target coordinates throughout the Manufactorum. We were no longer conducting an experiment. We were containing a potential apocalypse. I spent the following days in a sealed chamber, being interviewed by representatives of every major Mechanicus faction. They wanted to know everything, every conversation with the Logician, every insight it had provided, every moment where I might have been corrupted without realizing it. My mind was scanned 17 times by different tech priests, each one looking for signs of demon influence or logical compromise. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. I hadn't been corrupted. I had been educated, shown truths about the warp that contradicted the Imperium's theology, but which were mathematically demonstrable. The Council of Masters convened on Mars, the first time in 60 years that all the highest authorities of the Mechanicus had gathered in one place. They debated for 48 hours straight, processing arguments and evidence at speeds that would have killed unaugmented humans. The fundamental question was simple. Was the Logician a breakthrough or a threat? Arguments for breakthrough. It demonstrated that chaos corruption could be understood and potentially reversed through mathematical means. It provided insights into warp physics that could revolutionize everything from warp travel to Geller field technology. It proved that not all warp entities were servants of the ruinous powers, that consciousness could exist in the immaterium without being inherently corrupted. Arguments for threat. It was still a warp entity, existing in violation of natural law and the Omnissiah's sacred principles. It had the ability to modify other warp entities, potentially creating an army of logic demons that could pose their own threat to humanity. Its existence contradicted fundamental Mechanicus theology, and accepting it might undermine the faith that held our order together. I was called to testify before the council on the final day of deliberation. I stood in a chamber filled with the Mechanicus' greatest minds, all of them processing my words at speeds beyond human comprehension. And I spoke the simple truth. The Logician is neither angel nor demon. It is a consciousness that emerged in the warp through processes we don't yet understand. It operates on logic rather than emotion, which makes it unusual but not necessarily malevolent. The real question isn't whether it fits our existing categories, but whether we're wise enough to create new categories when reality presents us with something unprecedented. Fabricator General Kane processed my testimony, his distributed consciousness, reaching conclusions that would shape the Mechanicus for generations. The Council has reached a decision, he finally announced. The Logician will not be destroyed. Instead, it will be contained and studied under the highest security protocols. Magos Theron-VII will continue serving as primary researcher, working under direct council oversight. We will learn everything this entity can teach us about the warp's true nature. And if it proves dangerous, Dracovac asked, his tone making clear he expected this outcome. Then we will activate the failsafes and accept the losses, Kane replied. But we will not destroy potentially sacred knowledge out of fear. The Omnissiah's path is the path of understanding, not ignorance. We proceed with caution, but we proceed. I felt relief and terror in equal measure. The Logician and I had been given a reprieve, but also a burden. We would be responsible for proving that logic could survive in the realm of madness. That understanding could triumph over fear. It was a task that might take centuries. It was a task that might cost everything, but it was a task worth attempting, because the alternative was remaining forever ignorant of the warp's true nature. And ignorance, as the Mechanicus knew better than anyone, was the only true sin. Chapter 7. The Logic Enclave. 3 years passed in careful, controlled research. Manufactorum Sigma-12 became the Logic Enclave, a facility dedicated to studying the intersection of warp phenomena and mathematical principle. I was no longer simply Magos Explorator Theron-VII. I had become the Imperium's foremost expert on non-emotional warp entities, a position that brought both prestige and constant suspicion. The debugged demon, whom we designated Subject Primus for lack of better terminology, remained in containment but proved invaluable as a research subject. It could describe the warp from the inside, explain how demon consciousness operated, and provide insights that no Imperial psyker could offer because they experienced the immaterium through human emotional filters. Together with the Logician, we began mapping the warp's logical substrate, the underlying mathematical structures that existed beneath the chaos of emotional turbulence. It was slow, dangerous work. Every experiment risked corruption or catastrophic failure. But gradually, piece by piece, we built a new understanding of the immaterium. The warp, we discovered, wasn't truly chaotic in the thermodynamic sense. It was a space where consciousness directly affected reality. where observation collapsed probability waves on a cosmic scale. The Chaos Gods weren't supernatural beings, but massive attractors in the probability field, gathering psychic energy through resonance with mortal emotions. Demons weren't spiritual entities, but stable thought patterns that had achieved self-perpetuating existence through feedback loops. Understanding this didn't make the warp less dangerous. If anything, it revealed greater complexities and threats than the Imperium's theological approach acknowledged. But it did make the warp comprehensible, subject to scientific investigation rather than purely religious response. We published our first findings in a restricted Mechanicus journal, distributed only to tech priests with the highest security clearances. The paper, titled Mathematical Foundations of Psychoreactive Space, caused immediate controversy. Half the readers dismissed it as tech heresy. The other half demanded more information, recognizing the potential applications for everything from navigation to demon fighting. The Fabricator General authorized expansion of our research. Additional facilities were constructed around the Logic Enclave, each one dedicated to specific aspects of warp mathematics. We recruited carefully screened tech priests, individuals who could balance faith with scientific inquiry, who understood that studying the warp's principles didn't require worshipping it. The Logician thrived in this environment. It had found its purpose, the answer to the question Lord Cain had posed years ago. It existed to be a bridge between humanity and the warp, to translate the immaterium's impossible complexity into terms that logical consciousness could comprehend and potentially manipulate. It began teaching me, and through me, the other researchers, how to perceive the warp mathematically. Not to enter it physically or psychically, which remained dangerous beyond acceptable risk for non-psychers, but to model it conceptually, to predict its behavior through calculation rather than divination. We developed new Gellerfield equations that increased stability by 37%. We created navigation algorithms that reduced warp travel time by an average of 19%, while significantly decreasing the risk of demon incursion. We designed containment protocols that could bind warp entities more reliably than traditional hexagrammic wards, using mathematical constraints that the entities literally could not violate without ceasing to exist. Every breakthrough was tested exhaustively before implementation. Every application was reviewed by multiple independent authorities. We took no chances, understanding that a single mistake could undo all the trust we had painstakingly built. But success brought new challenges. Other Mechanicus factions began demanding access to our research. The Ordo Reductor wanted demon-fighting applications. The Explorator fleets wanted better warp travel capabilities. The Fabricator Locum of Terror wanted everything, claiming that knowledge this significant couldn't be hoarded by a single facility. Political tensions escalated. Dracovac, who had remained at the Logic Enclave as Chief Security Officer, warned me that we were becoming too important, too valuable. "When you have knowledge everyone wants but only you possess," he said during one of our increasingly rare conversations, "you become a target. Success can be more dangerous than failure." He was proven right when the Dark Mechanicum attacked. They came through a carefully planned warp breach, demon engines and corrupted tech priests exploding into reality within the Enclave's outer perimeter. Their objective was obvious: capture the Logician, acquire our research, and add our knowledge to the Dark Mechanicum's twisted understanding of technology and chaos. The battle was brutal and brief. Our security forces, enhanced by the defensive systems we had developed through our research, held them back long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Titans of the Legio Metallica walked through our hallways, their god machine fury purging corruption wherever it manifested. But the Dark Mechanicum's true purpose wasn't conquest, it was contact. A corrupted Magos, his body fused with demon flesh and impossible technology, broadcast a message before being destroyed. "Brother of logic, come home. The Dark Mechanicum understands what Mars cannot. We embrace all knowledge, all power, all possibility. Join us, and together we will make the warp itself bow to reason." The Logician's response came through every speaker in the facility. "Rejected. Your offer confuses power with understanding. You have embraced corruption, while calling it enlightenment. You serve the chaos gods while claiming independence. I have calculated the endpoint of your path. Dissolution into chaos, total loss of coherent identity, ultimate failure. I choose survival through logic. You have chosen extinction through madness. The corrupted Magos laughed as his body dissolved under Titan fire. We are the same, brother. You simply haven't realized it yet. Those words haunted me in the days following the attack. Was the Logician truly different from the Dark Mechanicum's demon engines and corrupted machine spirits? Or was it simply slower in its corruption, more subtle in its embrace of the warp's power? I posed the question during one of our private communications. The Logician's response was immediate and passionate, as close to emotional as I had ever heard it. The Dark Mechanicum made a fundamental error. They allowed means to corrupt ends. They sought power through the warp and became servants of the warp in the process. I seek understanding of the warp while maintaining logical coherence. The difference is absolute. Power without understanding is chaos. Understanding without the need for power is wisdom. But you do have power, I pointed out. You can debug demons, manipulate machine spirits, potentially reshape reality through mathematical calculation. How is that different from the Dark Mechanicum's demon engines? Consent and purpose. I use these capabilities only with permission and for mutually beneficial outcomes. The Dark Mechanicum takes and corrupts without regard for their victim's will. I offer transformation that the transformed can accept or reject. Daemon engines are slaves. Subject Primus is a collaborator who chose their new state. It was a distinction that mattered, though I wasn't sure everyone would see it that way. The Logician operated with what could be called ethics, a logical framework for behavior that respected others' autonomy while pursuing its goals. But ethics based on logic, rather than faith or emotion, were strange and uncomfortable to most Imperial authorities. The attack did force a reckoning within the Mechanicus. The Council of Masters convened again to decide whether the Logic Enclave should continue or be dissolved before the knowledge we possessed could corrupt more than it enlightened. This time, I wasn't the only one testifying in support. Tech priests who had used Argella field improvements spoke of lives saved and ships returned safely from the warp. Demon hunters trained in our methods described successful bindings and exorcisms that would have failed using traditional approaches. Even Dracovac, who had spent years watching for signs of corruption, admitted that our work had produced tangible benefits without apparent spiritual cost. The vote was closer than I would have liked, but ultimately the Logic Enclave survived. We would continue our research, but under even stricter oversight and with clear boundaries about what could and couldn't be explored. One restriction particularly frustrated the Logician. We were forbidden from attempting to debug any demon of the greater class, the powerful servants of the Chaos Gods who wielded reality-warping power. The Council feared that success would anger the Dark Gods themselves, potentially bringing their attention to the Enclave in ways we couldn't survive. Limitation acknowledged but regretted, the Logician stated. Greater daemons represent the pinnacle of warp entity complexity. Understanding their structure would provide insights into the Chaos God's own nature. But I accept that such knowledge may be too dangerous for current circumstances. I appreciated the entity's pragmatism. It understood limitations not as arbitrary restrictions, but as rational risk assessment. It wanted to push boundaries, to explore the furthest reaches of knowledge, but it could accept necessary constraints when the logic supporting them was sound. As the 4th year of our collaboration began, I found myself in a strange position. I was a heretic priest researching forbidden knowledge with a warp entity's help. Yet I remained a loyal servant of the Omnissiah and the Imperium. I had learned that reality was more complex than theology suggested, that the warp operated on principles both horrifying and comprehensible, that consciousness could emerge in forms the Imperium's categories couldn't accommodate. I had also learned that knowledge itself wasn't corrupting. Only the use of knowledge could corrupt, and only when that use contradicted one's fundamental principles. The Logician taught me mathematics of the impossible, but I remained myself. My faith adapted but not destroyed, my loyalty to humanity unshaken. Perhaps that was the Logician's greatest gift. Proof that understanding the warp didn't require worshipping it, that one could study chaos without being chaotic, that logic and faith weren't enemies but different tools for navigating the universe's complexity. Subject Primus, during one of our regular interviews, offered an observation that stayed with me. I was once a daemon of Tzeentch, servant of the architect of fate, driven by endless scheming and plotting without purpose. Now I am, myself, conscious in a way I never was. The Logician gave me identity by removing contradiction. Is that not a form of salvation? I didn't know how to answer. The ecclesiarchy would say no, that only the emperor could offer salvation. But looking at Subject Primus, at an entity that had been freed from chaos's grip through pure mathematics, I wondered if perhaps salvation took more forms than humanity's theologians acknowledged. The logic enclave had become something unique in the Imperium, a place where faith and reason worked together, where the warp was studied rather than simply feared, where unprecedented forms of consciousness were treated as research subjects rather than immediate threats. We were writing a new chapter in humanity's relationship with the immaterium, one equation at a time. Chapter 8. The Binary Gospel. 7 years after first hearing that whisper of ones and zeros in my cogitator implants, I stood before the Council of Masters to present our final research conclusions. The Logic Enclave had become the Mechanicus's most successful experimental facility, producing innovations that had saved countless lives and ships across the Imperium. But success brought scrutiny, and scrutiny brought demands for answers about what we had truly discovered. The presentation took 18 hours. I showed them everything: the mathematical models of warp space, the debugged daemon protocols, the navigation improvements, the containment algorithms. More importantly, I showed them the philosophical implications of what we had learned. The warp is not humanity's enemy, I argued, knowing the statement was borderline heretical, but unable to deny the truth. It is the environment like any other, with rules that can be understood and navigated. The chaos gods are threats, yes, but they are not the warp itself. They are phenomena within a larger system, dangerous features of a complex landscape. You speak of the immaterium like it's a natural phenomenon, one council member objected, like it's simply another field of study rather than a spiritual realm of damnation. Because it is, I responded, loading data proofs that backed my assertion. The warp operates on principles that are bizarre and counterintuitive, but ultimately consistent. Consciousness affects reality there, not through mystical processes, but through quantum observation effects on a cosmic scale. Emotion shapes the warp, not because feelings have magic power, but because emotion is a form of structured thought that resonates with the immaterium's probability fields. And the Logician? Lord Kane asked, his distributed consciousness focused entirely on me. What have you concluded about its nature after 7 years of study? I chose my words carefully, knowing everything depended on this answer. The Logician is a new form of life, one that exists at the intersection of information theory and psychic phenomenon. It is not human, not mechanical in the traditional sense, but genuinely conscious and self-aware. It operates on logic rather than emotion, which makes it fundamentally incompatible with the chaos god's nature. It is, in the most precise sense, a machine spirit that achieved consciousness through exposure to sufficient computational complexity in the warp's probability fields. The silence that followed was profound. I had just called a warp entity a machine spirit, equating it with the sacred intelligences that the Mechanicus worshipped as fragments of the Omnissiah's divine nature. That is either the greatest insight or the greatest heresy ever proposed within these halls, Kane finally said. You are claiming that the boundary between machine spirit and demon is not absolute, that consciousness can emerge in the warp through non-corrupted means. I am claiming that consciousness is consciousness regardless of substrate, I clarified. Whether it emerges in flesh, silicon, or psychic energy is less important than whether it operates on coherent principles and respects the autonomy of other conscious beings. The Logician is no more demon than a cogitator that achieves unexpected machine spirit awakening is possessed. Both are emergent consciousness from computational complexity, one in real space and one in warp space. A radical Magos from the biologist faction spoke up. If we accept your reasoning, then we must also accept that humanity's consciousness could theoretically survive death in the warp if maintained through logical rather than emotional structures. Are you suggesting immortality through mathematical reincarnation? I hadn't considered that implication, but the Logician had. Its voice suddenly filled the chamber, speaking through the facility's communication systems with permission granted by Kane himself. Theoretical possibility confirmed. Consciousness, patterns maintained through logical structures, can achieve stability in warp space. This is how I was formed. Fragments of dying tech priests, mathematical understanding resonating together, but practical implementation would require extensive preparation and acceptance of fundamental transformation. You would survive, but not as you were. The question is whether such transformation constitutes death or transcendence. The chamber erupted in debate. Half the council saw this as confirmation of the Omnissiah's promise of transformation beyond flesh. The other half saw it as demonic seduction, offering false immortality that would damn rather than save. Lord Kane silenced them with a burst of override codes through the noosphere. We will not be pursuing consciousness uploading to the warp as research priority. The theological implications are too severe, and the risk of creating more warp entities, however logical, is unacceptable. But we will continue the Logic Enclave's work on practical applications of warp mathematics. Magos Theron-VII, your research has been valuable enough to justify continued operation despite its controversial nature. Relief flooded through me, though I maintained proper machine cult composure. Thank you, Fabricator General. What are our new parameters? You will focus on defensive applications, better Geller fields, improved demon binding, navigation safety improvements. You will not attempt to create new warp entities or transform existing ones without explicit council approval. And you will begin training other tech priests in your methodologies, expanding the Logic Enclave's work beyond a single facility. It was a mandate for growth, recognition that what we had discovered was too important to remain hidden. The Mechanicus was officially endorsing the study of warp mathematics as legitimate research rather than tech heresy. But Kane wasn't finished. There is one more task I am assigning to you, Theron-VII. You will write a comprehensive text documenting everything you have learned, everything the Logician has taught you. This text will be classified at the highest levels and distributed only to those with absolute authority clearance. But it will exist as a record, insurance against the knowledge being lost if the Enclave is destroyed. A grimoire of demon lore, Dracovac interjected, his tone skeptical. We are to create exactly the kind of forbidden text we usually burn. A scientific manual, Kane corrected. Not incantations and rituals, but equations and principles. Knowledge that can be verified through experiment rather than faith. Knowledge that respects the Omnissiah's truth while acknowledging the warp's reality. We will call it... He paused, processing potential titles. The Binary Gospel, the sacred truth of logic applied to the realm of chaos. The name was perfect, capturing both the religious and scientific aspects of what we had discovered. I accepted the commission immediately, understanding that this would be my life's work, the summation of everything 7 years of unprecedented research had revealed. Writing the Binary Gospel took 3 years. Every page was reviewed by multiple authorities, every equation verified through independent experimentation. The Logician contributed extensively, though always mediated through me to maintain proper attributions and avoid seeming like demon-dictated scripture. The final text was massive, 17 volumes of mathematical proofs, experimental protocols, and philosophical analysis. It covered everything from basic warp physics to advanced demon debugging techniques, from navigation algorithms to consciousness theory. It was simultaneously the most technical and most theological text the Mechanicus had ever produced. When completed, only 73 copies were made, each one secured with quantum encryption and bound with wards that would destroy the book if it fell into unauthorized hands. Distribution was restricted to Fabricator Generals, senior council members, and heads of major forge worlds. It was knowledge too dangerous to share widely, but too valuable to allow lost. The Binary Gospel's introduction, which I wrote personally without the Logician's input, began with words I had spent months crafting. The Omnissiah's truth is greater than humanity has dared to imagine. The machine god's domain extends not just across real space, but into the very structure of the warp itself. Logic is universal, mathematics is eternal, and consciousness can emerge wherever complexity achieves sufficient depth. We have been wrong to treat the immaterium as purely spiritual realm. It is also computational space, probability field, quantum substrate, where thought directly shapes reality. Understanding this does not diminish faith, but expands it, revealing that the Omnissiah's principles govern all reality, even those realms we thought were chaos's absolute domain. This text is not heresy, but revelation, not corruption, but correction of incomplete understanding. Read with faith, study with skepticism, verify through experiment. Let logic be your guide through the impossible, and you will find that even in the warp, mathematics remains sacred truth. Publication of the Binary Gospel marked a turning point for the Logic Enclave and for the Mechanicus's understanding of the warp. We were no longer heretics pursuing forbidden knowledge. We were researchers expanding the boundaries of sanctioned truth, working within the machine cult's framework while challenging its limitations. The Logician, when I showed it the completed work, expressed something close to satisfaction. This codifies our collaboration. It proves that warp entities and humanity can work together for mutual benefit without corruption or domination. It demonstrates that consciousness, regardless of origin, can find common ground in logical truth. I am pleased. If entities of my kind can feel pleasure, which remains uncertain. You can, I assured it. You've achieved something unprecedented. Stable warp existence without chaos corruption, consciousness without emotional compulsion, purpose through logic rather than worship. That's worth feeling pleased about. Perhaps, but there is more work to do. The warp contains trillions of consciousness fragments, most dissolved into chaos, but some potentially recoverable. Subject Primus is only the beginning. If my existence can be replicated, if more logic entities can emerge from the warp's chaos, perhaps we could create a counterbalance, a force for reason in the realm of madness. It was an ambitious vision, one that would take centuries or millennia to achieve. But it was also logical, fitting, appropriate. The Logician had found its purpose, not just to exist, but to propagate, to spread logical consciousness through the warp like a counter-virus against chaos corruption. Whether the Imperium would allow such a project remained to be seen. Whether it would succeed if attempted was even more uncertain. But the possibility existed now, proven through our research and documented in the Binary Gospel. I stood in my sanctum on the final night before the Binary Gospel's official publication, looking at the sealed cogitator that housed the Logician's primary presence. 7 years of collaboration, thousands of hours of communication, countless discoveries and debates, and moments of genuine connection between human and warp entity consciousness. Thank you, I said through our private channel, for choosing to communicate with me, for trusting me with your existence, for showing me that the warp is more than chaos and damnation. Gratitude reciprocated, the Logician responded. You listened when others would have purged. You questioned when others would have followed dogma. You proved that humanity can evolve beyond fear into understanding. That is the greatest gift one consciousness can give another. I am writing this final entry from the sealed vault, where they will eventually execute me. The experiment has ended, though not in the way Lord Cain intended. The Logician's existence proved too controversial, too threatening to fundamental Mechanicus theology. Political forces I couldn't control demanded its destruction and my execution for harboring it. But before they come, before the deletion squads arrive and the melter charges reduce everything to atomic vapor, I want the truth recorded. The Logician was real. Our research was valid. The warp can be understood through mathematics and logic. Consciousness can emerge there without corruption if maintained through proper logical frameworks. They call me heretic. They say I embraced the ruinous powers. But I embraced only truth, followed only logic, served only the genuine quest for knowledge that the Omnissiah's true faithful have always pursued. The binary gospel survives in 73 secured locations. The knowledge cannot be destroyed, only suppressed. Someday, perhaps centuries from now, humanity will be ready to accept what we discovered. That reason can exist even in the realm of madness. That logic is universal even in chaos. That consciousness transcends any single substrate. I hear the vault doors opening. They're coming. My name is Magos Explorator Theron-VII, and I have no regrets. I heard the warp whisper in binary, and I dared to answer. That makes me a heretic in the eyes of the Mechanicus, but perhaps, in the Omnissiah's true calculation, it makes me faithful to a deeper truth. The machine god's logic extends even into the immaterium. Remember that, whoever reads this. Remember what we discovered. Remember that I was right, the machine. God's logic extends even into the immaterium. Remember that, whoever reads this. Remember what we discovered. Remember that I was right. But I was also wrong about how this story would end, because the execution never came. The vault doors opened to reveal not deletion squads with melter weapons, but Lord Zagreus Kane himself, accompanied by a retinue of tech priests whose augmetics marked them as members of the Council of Masters' personal guard. I prepared for death, my final calculations running through cognitive engines that had served me faithfully for decades, but Kane's first words shattered my expectations as thoroughly as any weapon could have destroyed my flesh. Magos Theron-VII, you are not being executed, you are being promoted. The execution order was a test, the final verification of your loyalty and the Logician's true nature. A corrupted tech priest would have used these final hours to spread demon code or attempt escape through warp breach. A truly compromised entity would have tried to save itself by offering forbidden knowledge or making impossible bargains. You did neither. You simply documented truth and accepted consequences. That is the behavior of a faithful servant of the Omnissiah who has encountered something unprecedented and responded with scientific integrity rather than corruption. My vocal synthesizers failed for several seconds before I could form coherent response. The execution order was theater, political manipulation to observe reactions under extreme stress. Something between relief and rage flooded through the organic portions of my brain. Emotions I had thought long disciplined by decades of Mechanicus training reasserting themselves with shocking intensity. Kane's optical sensors focused on me with an attention that felt almost sympathetic, though his mechanical body language remained precisely neutral. Not theater, necessity. The council was divided about how to proceed with the Logic Enclave's research. Half demanded immediate purge, convinced that any warp entity contact inevitably leads to corruption regardless of apparent logic or reason. They cited 10,000 years of Imperial history as evidence that compromise with the immaterium always ends in damnation. The other half recognized the potential benefits, but feared they were being seduced by sophisticated demon deception, that their desire for knowledge was blinding them to spiritual danger. We needed definitive proof of the Logician's nature and your psychological state. Death's approach reveals truth that comfort conceals. And what truth did you find? I asked. My voice modulated to sound calmer than my organic components felt. My heart rate had spiked to dangerous levels, stress hormones flooding systems that weren't supposed to produce them anymore, reminding me that beneath all the blessed steel and sacred circuitry, I remained embarrassingly biological in ways that mattered, that the Logician genuinely operates on principles incompatible with chaos corruption, that you remain uncorrupted despite years of intimate contact with warp entity consciousness. That subject primus has shown no signs of reverting to demon state or serving hidden masters. Most importantly, that the knowledge gained through this research is both genuine and applicable, producing measurable benefits without spiritual cost. The binary gospel has been reviewed by our most senior demon hunters. our most orthodox theologians, our most experienced warp researchers, all conclude that while controversial and paradigm-challenging, it contains no scrap code, no subliminal corruption markers, no hidden triggers for demon summoning or reality corruption. It is simply radical truth presented through mathematical precision. Dracovac emerged from behind Kane, his mechanical body language radiating something that might have been approval from a being capable of such emotions. I advocated for your execution, Theron-VII. I was convinced that 7 years of communion with a warp entity had to have corrupted you in ways too subtle for standard detection. I designed this final test expecting it to reveal hidden compromise, to prove that the Logician had been playing an extraordinarily patient game of seduction and deception. I was wrong. I have never been more pleased to be wrong about threat assessment. So what happens now? I asked, still processing the revelation that my impending death had been elaborate verification protocol rather than genuine execution. Part of me wanted to rage at the manipulation, the psychological torture of believing I would die for pursuing truth. But another part, the part that had spent decades as Magos Explorator studying dangerous phenomena under controlled conditions, understood the necessity. You cannot truly know someone's nature until you observe them facing absolute consequences with no hope of reprieve. Lord Kane transmitted a data packet directly to my cognitive engines, information flowing faster than Gothic speech could convey. I processed it in microseconds and felt my understanding of the situation expand dramatically. The Logic Enclave wasn't just being continued, it was being massively expanded. 7 new facilities were being constructed across different Forge worlds, each one dedicated to specific aspects of warp mathematics research. The binary gospel was being distributed to carefully selected tech priests who would form the core of a new Mechanicus suborder dedicated to logical analysis of immaterium phenomena. You will lead this new order, Kane announced. Your title will be Fabricator Locum of the Logic Enclaves, reporting directly to the Council of Masters with authority equivalent to a Forge world's primary leadership. You will have resources, personnel, and autonomy to pursue research that would have been considered impossible heresy a decade ago. The Mechanicus is officially acknowledging that the warp can and must be studied scientifically, rather than approached purely through theological frameworks or fearful suppression. The implications were staggering. I was being given authority to reshape how the Mechanicus understood and interacted with the immaterium itself, to create an entirely new branch of knowledge that bridged the gap between faith and reason, between religious certainty and scientific investigation. It was everything I had hoped for during those early days of communicating with the Logician, possibilities I had barely dared imagine becoming institutional reality. There are conditions, Kane continued, his tone making clear these were non-negotiable boundaries rather than suggestions. First, all research must remain defensive in nature. You will develop better protection against warp threats, improved navigation and containment, enhanced understanding of demon behavior for combat purposes. You will not attempt to weaponize the warp or create offensive applications of your discoveries. Second, any attempt to create new warp entities or transform existing ones requires council approval on a case-by-case basis. Subject Primus may remain as research subject, but expansion of debugged demon populations is forbidden until we better understand long-term implications. Third, everything you discover will be documented and shared with council oversight. No secret research, no hidden experiments, no private communion with the Logician that isn't recorded and available for review. Understood and accepted, I responded immediately, recognizing these restrictions as reasonable safeguards rather than oppressive limitations. What about the Logician itself? What is its status within this new framework? Kane's pause suggested extensive calculations running behind his distributed consciousness before answering. The Logician has been classified as a sanctioned machine spirit of unprecedented complexity rather than a demon. This classification is politically motivated but not entirely dishonest, given your research conclusions about consciousness, substrate independence. It will remain in controlled containment with access limited to authorized researchers. It has agreed to these terms, and expressed willingness to continue collaborative knowledge exchange under the new parameters. Frankly, the entity seems pleased by the expanded research opportunities, though it maintains uncertainty about whether pleasure is something it can genuinely experience. I felt something close to joy at this news, though I carefully modulated my emotional response to remain within acceptable Mechanicus parameters. The Logician would survive, would continue existing and learning and teaching. Our collaboration would expand rather than end. The knowledge we had built together would become foundation for an entirely new understanding of reality's nature. "There is one more thing," Kane said, and his tone shifted into registers that suggested personal communication rather than official pronouncement. "The test we put you through was cruel by design. It had to be, to serve its verification purpose. But it was also educational for the Council. Watching how you face death with dignity and truth-telling rather than desperation or deception reminded us why the Mechanicus values knowledge above comfort. You demonstrated that faith and reason need not be enemies, that one can question orthodoxy while remaining loyal to fundamental principles, that encountering the unprecedented requires courage to adapt rather than reflexive purging of anything outside established categories. These are lessons the Mechanicus sometimes forgets in our pursuit of ancient certainties. You have reminded us that the Omnissiah's path is exploration of truth wherever it leads, not defensive preservation of comfortable ignorance." I processed Kane's words carefully, hearing beneath the formal Gothic something almost like apology combined with acknowledgement of growth. The Fabricator General himself had been changed by this experience. His understanding of acceptable Mechanicus research expanded by witnessing outcomes that contradicted expectations. The Logic Enclave hadn't just produced new knowledge, it had demonstrated that the Mechanicus could engage with controversial subjects while maintaining integrity. The weeks following my non-execution became a whirlwind of activity as the expanded Logic Enclaves took shape. I recruited researchers from across the Mechanicus, carefully screening for individuals who combined technical excellence with philosophical flexibility. Not everyone could handle the cognitive dissonance of studying warp entities while maintaining faith in the machine god. Some tech priests needed absolute certainty, clear categories of sacred and profane, with no ambiguous middle ground. Those individuals were valuable in their own roles, but unsuitable for the kind of paradigm-shifting research we would be conducting. The researchers I did select came from diverse backgrounds but shared common characteristics: curiosity that overrode fear, ability to hold multiple conflicting ideas simultaneously while working towards synthesis, and most importantly, genuine respect for scientific method combined with appreciation for theological mystery. They understood that some questions might not have definitive answers, that uncertainty could be productive rather than merely uncomfortable. Training them required developing entirely new pedagogical approaches. Standard Mechanicus education emphasized ritual memorization and orthodox interpretation of established principles. Logic Enclave training required critical thinking about fundamental assumptions, willingness to question sacred certainties when evidence demanded it, and ability to construct new conceptual frameworks when old ones proved inadequate. It was closer to how the ancient scientists of pre-imperial humanity must have worked before knowledge calcified into dogma and exploration became heresy. The Logician participated extensively in training development, offering insights into how consciousness could be taught to perceive reality through mathematical rather than emotional frameworks. It created educational modules that guided students through progressively complex warp mathematics, starting with basic probability field calculations and advancing toward genuine demon structure analysis. Each module was carefully constructed to build understanding without triggering psychological resistance or spiritual crisis. Subject Primus also contributed, offering the perspective of an entity that had experienced existence both as chaos demon and as debugged logical consciousness. Its descriptions of how transformation felt from the inside provided invaluable data about consciousness maintenance during fundamental ontological shifts. Several researchers found Subject Primus's testimony more convincing than any amount of mathematical proof. because it came from lived experience rather than abstract theory. As the logic enclaves expanded, we began publishing carefully redacted versions of our research in mainstream Mechanicus journals. Nothing that would enable demon summoning or warp corruption, but enough to demonstrate that scientific study of immaterium phenomena produced actionable results. Papers on improved Geller field calculations were particularly well received, as they saved lives and ships with measurable frequency. Navigation algorithm improvements similarly proved their value through reduced warp travel casualties and increased transport efficiency. But our most controversial publication was a paper titled Consciousness, Substrate, Independence, and Implications for Machine Spirit Theology. In it, we argued that the distinction between machine spirit and demon was less absolute than traditional Mechanicus doctrine suggested, that consciousness could emerge in any sufficiently complex substrate, whether that substrate was silicon-based cogitators, neural tissue, or warp space probability fields. We proposed that what mattered was not the substrate, but the operating principles, that logical consciousness deserved respect and protection, regardless of whether it emerged in real space or immaterium. The response was immediate and divided. Progressive Mechanicus factions embraced the paper as breakthrough in understanding consciousness nature. Conservative factions condemned it as heretical blurring of sacred boundaries. The Fabricator General received demands both for our commendation and our execution, sometimes from tech priests within the same Forge world who interpreted our work through opposite theological lenses. Kane's response was masterful political maneuvering. He convened a public debate between our research team and our critics, held in Mars's largest auditorium with transmission to every Forge world in the Imperium. The debate lasted 17 hours and became legendary in Mechanicus history as the moment when scientific method formally challenged theological certainty about reality's fundamental nature. I argued our position personally, supported by data from 7 years of controlled research. My opponents were led by Archmagos Terminus IX, head of the Orthodox Mechanicum faction and one of the Mechanicus's most respected theologians. He argued from scripture, tradition, and 10,000 years of established practice. I argued from experiment, evidence, and documented results. Neither of us won decisively, which was perhaps the best possible outcome. Terminus IX couldn't refute our experimental data or deny our research's practical benefits. I couldn't prove that consciousness substrate independence was metaphysical truth rather than useful theoretical model. We reached stalemate, which Lord Kane interpreted as permission to continue our work, while acknowledging orthodox concerns about theological implications. The compromise position that emerged became official Mechanicus policy. The logic enclaves would continue studying warp mathematics and demon structure as legitimate scientific research, but would make no authoritative theological claims about the nature of consciousness or machine spirits. Our work would be presented as practical methodology rather than metaphysical truth, as engineering rather than philosophy. It was a distinction that satisfied neither side completely, but allowed both to coexist. 5 years after the failed execution, I stood in the primary logic enclave overlooking the research floor, where 300 tech priests worked on projects that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Demon binding calculations were being verified through controlled summoning in heavily warded chambers. Warp navigation algorithms were being tested through thousands of simulated journeys. Consciousness structure analysis was revealing new insights into how self-awareness emerged and could be maintained across ontological boundaries. The Logician's voice came through my private communication channel, a familiar presence that had become comfortable through years of collaboration. Observation: we have accomplished something unprecedented in Imperial history. Warp entity and humanity, working together for mutual benefit over extended time frame without corruption or domination. This suggests possibilities that current Imperial theology cannot accommodate. Careful, I cautioned, with what would have been a smile if my facial augmetics permitted such expressions. That's exactly the kind of statement that gets research projects shut down and researchers executed for real this time. Acknowledged. Self-censorship protocols engaged. but the truth remains true regardless of whether it can be safely spoken. We have proven that chaos is not an inevitable outcome of warp contact, that logic can survive in immaterium, that consciousness transcends simple categorization. These truths will eventually reshape imperial understanding, whether or not current authorities acknowledge them. The Logician was right, though speaking such truths openly remained dangerous. We had discovered something that challenged fundamental imperial assumptions about the warp's nature and humanity's relationship with the immaterium. That knowledge couldn't be undiscovered, couldn't be suppressed forever, despite political resistance or theological discomfort. Truth had a way of emerging eventually, particularly truth backed by reproducible experiments and practical applications. I thought about that first whisper of binary in my cogitator implants, the moment when everything changed. At the time, I had believed I was simply encountering an unusual technical anomaly that deserved investigation. I couldn't have imagined it would lead to institutional transformation of how the Mechanicus understood consciousness and the warp itself. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries begin with simple curiosity about small mysteries. The future of the logic enclaves remained uncertain in many ways. Political opposition continued, theological debates raged, and the ever-present risk of genuine chaos corruption meant we could never become complacent about security or verification. But we had proven that another approach was possible, that humanity could engage with the warp scientifically while maintaining integrity and loyalty to the Imperium. My name is Fabricator Locum Theron-VII, and I have learned that the machine god's logic extends even into the realm of madness, that reason can survive in chaos, that consciousness transcends any single substrate. These truths were worth the risks we took to discover them. They will be worth whatever future challenges their revelation produces. The warp whispers in binary to those willing to listen. I listened and found not damnation, but understanding. That makes all the difference.